Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stacker. We're live here in Basel, Switzerland for the Cloud Foundry Summit. And today, right now, I'm interviewing Dr. Nic Williams. Hello, Dr. Nic Williams, CEO of Stark & Wayne. How are you?
I'm excellent.
Good. And Marco Voelz, a software developer with SAP. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I came from Australia. How far did you come from?
From Germany.
I thought you live in Buffalo or something.
Many Stark & Wayne people live in Buffalo. I now live in Brisbane, Australia.
Oh, okay. Is
but
that where
Buffalo's
you,
great.
Did you grow up there?
If you ever need a place to go and live that's very affordable and lots of tech going on, move to Buffalo.
How about Brisbane?
You should come to Brisbane if you want to have your face fried off 3 months of the year because of the heat.
That's that hot.
And then there's the animals, which...
What about the animals?
Some of them don't try to kill you, but most of them generally have
most of them
a negative attitude to humanity.
Yeah, well, that, you know, so you need to be
like this, or a thing like this, or something that they'll kill you.
So you need to be you need to really think about, like, you know, that's a tough place to live.
You need to have a will. That's what you need to have.
You need to have that resilience, don't you? And speaking of resilience,
wow, what a segue.
Wow.
The next thing you say better have something to do with resilience.
Well, I hope it does, because we're talking about BOSH, and that is one of its main claims, isn't it? Resilience?
Yeah, sure. So I guess one of the things that BOSH takes care of is when some of your VMs in your deployment goes down, the promise is it tries to bring them up again,
right.
So you don't have to care about it.
Right. So that speaks to Brisbane, speaks to Buffalo, speaks to, like, it's cold there.
To Germany. It speaks to Germany. Came back to where it needed to be after going down a couple of times in the last 100 years.
So
that's true.
So before we get started, maybe give us just a backgrounder on BOSH. What is BOSH? Just for people who may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, so BOSH is the lifecycle management tool originally developed for Cloud Foundry, but also used for the services, which means it brings up your deployment, all of your VMs, takes care of configuring that complicated cluster for you, so you don't have to. As we already talked about it also has resilience capacities, such as health management, trying to keep it up and running. And it's also used to package the software that you're installing. And I think essentially BOSH is at the heart of the Cloud Foundry multi-cloud strategy, because it has an abstraction layer called the Cloud Provider Interface, or CPI, which is abstracting all those nitty-gritty infrastructure details from you and from the BOSH code base itself. So you can run it on AWS, Azure, GCP, OpenStack, wherever you like, as long as there is a CPI for it.
So, Dr. Nic, what's your take on BOSH now? What's the state of BOSH today? Is it unchanged? Is that what's important about it?
So for anyone that my history of BOSH is I was one of the first people to discover it 2012, 6 years ago. So it has been through many changes.
Tell me about that in 2012.
Well, back then there was only one cloud. So there are now many clouds, and so the abstraction has evolved to suit those. Back then I was living in Palo Alto, California, and I knew some VMware people, and they were getting very excited. Cloud Foundry had come out, and they talked about Cloud Foundry being the inner shell, and that there was this mysterious outer shell that managed the lifecycle, looking after this thing called Cloud Foundry. They tried to use Chef. They tried to, they just realized that Chef wasn't doing it for them. So internally, they built this new outer shell to run this already complex but growing more and more complex system called Cloud Foundry. And I was the VP of engineering at Engine Yard at the time.
Okay.
And we had 2,000 customers. We'd seen a lot of problems with trying to own and operate these customers for them. We were a Gen 2 based source build system. We had problems building AMIs. We just didn't have tooling. And here was this thing called BOSH, which promised tooling around building AMIs or base images, a whole packaging system that didn't require Gen 2 incantations of magic, but was otherwise dead simple. Start processes, stop processes, put software on system, run system. If system disappears, bring it back. Go on for 20 years.
Right.
And I fell in love with the simplicity of solving and neutralizing, as you sort of said, the CPI thing. If you've never been an Azure person, there's only a few things you need to know, and all of a sudden the same system can be running on Azure. So that gives you a lot of operational symmetry as you go across clouds.
I remember covering Cloud Foundry in its early days, and there was this sense that it was something, Cloud Foundry was something quite different, and it was kind of a new thought on platform as a service, and now platform as a service is a topic that's not necessarily discussed as much anymore.
It turns out, so I came from a Heroku period, right? So I used Heroku in Engine Yard.
Yeah.
So to me, Cloud Foundry was like a bring your own Heroku. Turns out, no one knew what Heroku was, of why they would bring it themselves. And then the whole conversation got convoluted with the introduction of Docker, which started and said, let's solve this tiny problem. And then Kubernetes 2 years later, and really the problem will go on, and as long as we care about developers and businesses, it'll all be interesting.
So, so if you think about it today, then Marco, what is that comparison you make when you're thinking about BOSH? What is BOSH today that makes it still unique and really important?
Yeah, I think. Today, there is no single tooling that gives you all of those properties in with a single experience, right? Even with tooling that does solve like half of it or a lower level thing, like for example Terraform, you have to know so many things about the actual infrastructure, about the differences between the clouds and all of that, and I think BOSH does best by abstracting all of those, right, and not leaking too many details, at least through. Yeah, that's also the amazing part.
It owns and operates the outside, being the cloud, and also the inside of the VM. So, like Chef operates the inside and brings a VM to some sort of state. Terraform operates on the outside. But neither of those really solve the puzzle of just mounting a disk. One of the simplest things that BOSH looks after is a disk. So on the outside, it will provision a disk on Amazon and attach it. But on the inside, it will mount it, format it, and with that simple primitive, it can own and operate that disk, resize it, scale it, and for the rest of its life. Yeah.
So now, today we're looking at BOSH. What's the latest with it? I want to get a kind of idea, what is that next frontier for BOSH, and how are we seeing that now, and what's the progress we can take from what we're seeing now about that narrative that we should see going forward?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the biggest topics that we're currently looking at is user experience, and that's also in terms of user experience for people operating BOSH and operating deployments with BOSH, and user experience for those people building releases. That's not necessarily the same persons or the same people, but for those two personas, we are trying to optimize or improve the user experience. So that has lots to do with the current developments of on-demand service brokers, for example, where previously BOSH was a tool that operators used when they needed to change the system state. You figured out you needed to scale up, then you used BOSH. You figured out that you wanted to roll out a new operating system version, you use BOSH. But now, your customers type CF-create service, they want to provision a Postgres database, and what runs under the hood is BOSH, provisioning that Postgres cluster or that MongoDB cluster, right? That means, more and more people are using it, you get more and more deployments going on there, and suddenly that is a runtime dependency, right?
Right, people are using it and they don't know they're using it.
Exactly, and they don't want to care, right? They just say, well, I tried to create a service, which I'm paying for, by the way. It didn't work.
So what he's saying for anyone is, if you've ever used Amazon RDS or and you say, hey, I want a Postgres database with Amazon, BOSH it would be an implementation detail of how you would have that in your own data center. Yep. And a little API in front of it, which basically...
It's just an implementation.
The little API will just say, hey, I need Postgres cluster, and it will tell BOSH. You mentioned BOSH release. For anyone who's a Kubernetes person, perhaps that's similar to a Docker image plus a Helm chart, or Docker, it's the Docker image. It's the packaging of everything, and perhaps the description of how you deploy it for the common case.
Yep. So yeah, I guess that experience is one of the biggest parts that we are trying to solve in the near future. Further out, there is other interesting topics. So people are more and more concerned with the world of Kubernetes, I guess. So currently BOSH is most of the time, provisioning VMs, right, in
Right.
all different kinds of infrastructures. Then people wrote a Kubernetes CPI. So you can use BOSH, the same experience, and get Kubernetes pods and services instead.
So what is it when you use it? What does it bring up? Pods or
Yep,
what
it brings up pods and it brings up an additional service.
Yep.
Because you want to keep the IP stable and not care about when Kubernetes reschedules your pods. So that kind of works. And then there is other projects like this recently incubated CF containerization project,
Right.
Where people try to come to take CF deployment, which is the de facto open source standard of how to package and deploy Cloud Foundry, and want to come up with some way to transform all of this that people care about and make sure it doesn't break and it still works and so on, and transform that into containers and the right different YAMLs that Kubernetes will be
The
taking.
dialects, the YAML dialects.
Right. So instead of the CF team having to have two main distributions, like a BOSH distribution and a Kubernetes distribution, it allows them to focus all their CI efforts on just the BOSH distribution, and then take and transform the BOSH distribution, which is used by everyone, and turn it into a Kubernetes iteration that you can then use.
Can you take me then through that transformation that you speak of, that when you're going through that process?
So about the different pieces that need to...
yeah, I thought that was interesting what you were saying.
Right. Yeah. And there's a project called Fissile.
Right. This is the CF containerization project. It's
Right.
like the GitHub project is called Fissile.
Sorry, I'm still new with the language, the new nomenclature. But yeah, the SUSE guy and IBM. So IBM came out with CF Enterprise, and I believe it's based on this premise of taking CF release, turning into a Kubernetes experience, and then saying, well, let's deploy it that way.
Yeah.
So how do you think about then the Cloud Foundry architecture, as CFCR, right? The Cloud Foundry container runtime, how that marries with BOSH and those Kubernetes capabilities? Is there much? Is BOSH? One of the things you always come up across, and we were talking about this a little bit before, is like things move so fast, right? And at some point, there's there's this adaptation that needs to happen, right? What's that adaptation?
So CFCR is still deployed by BOSH.
Right?
That's its definition.
Correct. So one of the main selling point is you don't know how to reliably spin up a bunch of Kubernetes clusters for all of your customers. Well, use BOSH. Here it is. So I guess this is one thing. And if you're talking about what needs to happen, such that BOSH adapts to the new Kubernetes world, I guess there is a few things that we try there. Like one is we need to become more declarative in, for example, our descriptions, how the processes on the VMs or in the containers or in the pods actually run, right? And that's currently mostly done by shell scripts, which we all know and love and don't test. And there is the BOSH Process Manager, which is about to get a 1.0 release, which moves all of that into a declarative YAML spec such that you can easily understand what is my run command, what are my arguments, what additional mounts do I need, and so on, right? So coming from there, it's actually pretty easy to transform that to any different container runtime definition, for example, for Kubernetes or for anything else you want to use.
It's similar, I guess, to a pod, the definition of pod, right? So
yeah, pretty much, I guess.
I want this thing to run. I need access to this disk and this much memory.
And I guess for that definition, there's a few things missing. It's kind of difficult now to figure out what, for example, the port might be that my service will be running on, such that I can properly expose it in Kubernetes. But those are minor details, I'd say. We are already on a good track to use those declarative definitions to then transform them in a better way to some Kubernetes-related description format.
Now, there's a new bit of work going on with networking. The VMware guys are doing networking, which has been, so to use BOSH is to use Terraform, because BOSH doesn't have anything to say about how networking comes into existence. But soon it will. That's a question mark.
Soon it will. You're entirely right. Thanks. So we're currently adding networking capabilities in BOSH as well. One of the main reasons was actually coming from PKS or other services.
The on-demand.
That are provisioned on demand, and if you are provisioning them for different customers, you most likely will want to run them in different networks, like isolated network segments, such that customer A's service can't talk to customer B's service.
Right.
And what people are doing right now to achieve this is they build some kind of network provisioning, terraforming in their service brokers. And that's very sad, because your service brokers should provision a service, not call Terraform, and worry about the state and all of that stuff, right? So these things like creating a network, potentially providing some security groups and this stuff is now what's coming into BOSH, and most of that stuff will happen in the CPIs because this, again, is infrastructure specific, right? It's different on vSphere than on OpenStack and AWS. But luckily, we do have this nice abstraction where we can move things to. And now the CPIs will get a create network method and a delete network method, right? And the brokers can just take care of, like, not caring and take care of their services and not the rest anymore. That's cool.
So when you're thinking about that, you know, SAP has been talking a lot about Cloud Foundry running on top of Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm.
What is the reason for that? And maybe you can kind of provide context with that kind of as we're thinking about BOSH?
Yeah, so I think one of the main things we're seeing with our customers, and I guess with many companies in general, is that almost all of them have some use cases that they need to run or want to run on Kubernetes anyways, regardless of Cloud Foundry or not, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why, for example, CFCR was created, because although we do have Cloud Foundry, we found that there are use cases where you need the freedom and the additional flexibility of a Kubernetes runtime. So if you get to those customers and you tell them, well, great that you already have Kubernetes, by the way, what other cloud infrastructure are you using to provision other things? Most people will like scratch their head and saying like, well, can't I run this stuff on Kubernetes? Why should I not, right? So if you have people who are capable of operating Kubernetes, who can manage this, scale it out, and so on, why would you need additional people managing vSphere, OpenStack, or anything else that you run in your private data center? So I think what we're seeing is that Kubernetes is becoming the abstraction that people try to build on. And yeah, that's why we're pushing for it, I guess.
So what...
I have a question. Do you think that, is there really need to add more and more sort of fancy features like BPM? I know BPM's coming, but is it really necessary when perhaps...
Business process management.
That's, BOSH process manager is the simpler way of describing things. And, you know, we could go down a path where we add all sorts of dynamic features to BOSH, which you otherwise just get from Kubernetes. Do you see a future where really we just, BOSH deploys Kubernetes, because the idea of everyone's already got Kubernetes is a bit fake, because they don't know how to run Kubernetes, so they still need a way to run Kubernetes, which we have with BOSH. So is it BOSH which runs Kubernetes, which then runs Cloud Foundry or databases and things like that? And that's BOSH becomes its primary purpose isn't to run Cloud Foundry, but to run Kubernetes.
Yeah, I guess ideally that would be the target. I guess the question is, how far out is that target, right? And I don't see that happening in the next year or the next 2 years even. We are still on a long path. And part of that transitioning process is to make it easier for people to like take BOSH-based things and put them on top of a different abstraction.
So that's my question. I'm not just asking.
No, I love it.
Around the conference, that's my trying to get.
What are you hearing? What are people asking? What are people saying?
Very early in the conference.
I know, but you've had some conversations. But
I've not had anyone tell me that's a stupid question.
What are they saying?
It's variations of yes, possibly, because there's different stakeholders, people who are invested in, Cloud Foundry running directly on BOSH. It looks great on the charts, and that you'd need Kubernetes to do anything. It's still a something to stomach. I know that if if we'd caught up at the previous CF Summit in Boston a few months ago, I don't know I was mentally there at that point, but that's just a thing I'm spitballing.
Where are you now mentally?
Look, I play with Kubernetes over the last few years. I keep playing with it, but only recently have I started playing with it with like, okay, I get it. This is actually, I don't compare it to Cloud Foundry. It's always people saying, oh, Kubernetes versus Cloud Foundry. To me, it's not that at all. To me, it's BOSH versus Kubernetes. If I'm trying to solve a problem I previously solved with BOSH, would I have more fun if I'd had Kubernetes running and I could play with that level of the knobs and dials that you get there? It's a lot of flexibility that, as a BOSH person, as a platform operator, I would enjoy. But I don't want to give that to an app developer.
No, totally. Totally no.
We still need the CF push experience, whether it's called CF push or Knative deploy or whatever.
Right.
There's that experience has to be separated from knobs and dials of Kubernetes.
Yep. Definitely.
Well, that's interesting because what you're saying is, it's not Cloud Foundry versus Kubernetes. It's really BOSH, and Kubernetes.
Well, that's. I mean, as a BOSH user, I can have that most people have never touched BOSH and have no capacity to compare it. But it might be Chef versus Kubernetes.
But most people
are coming from something else to Kubernetes. But wherever I took Kubernetes, I'd still need a way to own and operate it. And so that's the CFCR project for me.
So one of the beauties that people talk about Cloud Foundry is that experience, right?
Yep.
The CF push, right? So where does the developer sit in all this? Where we talk a lot about BOSH, right? In BOSH's evolution.
That's what this talk is. That's what we're talking about here. So we're going to keep talking about
the
BOSH.
deep learning curve. I mean, people talk about the complexity that comes with it, right? And like how you do really have to kind of get through this very difficult kind of transition.
I wrote a book about BOSH.
But Kubernetes is the same way, isn't it?
It has to. That's right. I don't get anyone that says that BOSH is hard, but Kubernetes is easy. I don't think it's
Have you heard
the same
that?
amount of time looking at BOSH that they did looking at Kubernetes, right?
Huh.
The ideas are still advanced ideas, and you need to, BOSH, I'd argue, is simpler from running a BOSH release because there's so fewer things you can do. Like this process is starting and stopping, and just be happy about that.
Yeah, I guess probably the day one experience is actually easier and smoother on Kubernetes.
Right.
Because
the little examples like deploy pod.
Right, there is like snippets all over the place.
Right.
You can easily Google it. You find it in pretty much any ecosystem for any service for everything. And BOSH is very limited currently to the Cloud Foundry ecosystem. So if you don't have somebody from within our arguably smaller ecosystem doing whatever you wanted to do, then you're stuck, right? You're all up to yourself, and you have to figure out the stuff.
We don't get to hide a lot of advanced concepts up front. Like
Correct.
you can have fun and you can feel like you're learning Kubernetes the moment you do a run pod type example and then a deployment and you expose a service, your traffic's working. It's like, hey, I'm a hero.
Yeah, I've done it.
That getting to feel like a hero with BOSH takes more time and you have to be a bit more committed.
So the theme for the conference is running at scale, right? That's the marketing theme, right?
Sounds
for
like
the
a good,
conference.
yes, right.
What?
Everyone makes more money at scale, so
There you go. So I'm thinking about how kind of we're helping developers work at scale. When you were first using BOSH, it wasn't a multi-cloud type of environment whatsoever.
Right, it was vSphere, and they'd started work on AWS at the time. They had the team working on it, even though they were employees of VMware, had Amazon concepts in their head as they built it. They knew that vSphere was different from Amazon, but they could see that Amazon's model was more going to be the future of what computing infrastructure looked like at a time when that was a hard thing to pick. And it turned out they were right. Everyone copied Amazon's concepts rather than VMware's
Well,
concepts.
now we see a pretty close relationship between VMware and AWS, too, which is interesting.
Well, no one wants to be left behind. What are you going to do, to ignore Amazon? Amazon's busy ignoring you.
So when you're thinking about the cloud provider interfaces, how does that help developers work at scale across these multi-cloud environments?
Well, if you don't need to care about the details, then certainly it enables you to expand to a lot of other infrastructures, right? For example, right now we just incubated the Huawei Cloud CPI, which means you want to expand to China, you want to go at scale there, you can, right? Previously that was pretty hard because there wasn't real an abstraction for it, and now there is. So things like that enable you to do things that you otherwise would have needed to invest much more work.
Right. But so we know that when you're working, in these environments, and you're thinking about, these scale outs and such, that you always coming up against this issue of choice. We talked a lot about this beforehand. And so what are the trade-offs in choice? Because there are so many choices now that people can have. We were talking about Zookeeper, and there's so many alternatives to Zookeeper, for just one example. So how do you think about that? Like,
and Zookeeper's not the thing people choose. They would
no, they don't.
etcd or Consul or whatever.
But I mean, it's like an example of it, I think, right? You talk about your ultimate guide to BOSH. That's where I was looking at it.
The Zookeeper example comes from, but it's like.
But the choice issue is one that's there, right? And so how do you think about choice? Because like they're talking about it on stage with the users. They're saying, well, yeah, there's kind of like this debate up there about
this whole
BOSH.
question tortures me, because you know what choice means? Choice means someone running Mongo when you don't necessarily have wanted them to, or someone running MySQL but without knowing what all the knobs and dials are on MySQL, right? Or running MySQL and not having set up backups, or having set up backups but have no idea how they'd ever restore should they ever need to. Does anyone else know where the backups have gone? Oh, the backups are on the same machine that the database was on. Well, that's really exciting. Well done. You've lost everything at one time. So choice is. Choice as a platform owner, or as a business, as a CTO, CIO, someone responsible for, yes, tech, but responsible for the business running. Choice is a very sharp knife that you're given to people.
Right.
Which is.
But choice always has.
If you talk to Cloud Foundry people,
but choice always has a sharp. There's always a sharp knife.
If you talk to Cloud Foundry people about Kubernetes, and this is very quickly where conversations go. It's like, well, do you want anyone to just pick whatever database they want? Is it going to be updated? Is it going to be scaled? Is it going to be maintained? The idea of the service broker concept in Cloud Foundry, I just think, I don't know of a better model where it sort of says, let's let another group of people in the organization look after that, and you look after your app. And like in a Kubernetes world with the service catalog, I think it's called, that could all be on the same Kubernetes cluster, but it still allows for that definition of responsibility. And the choice perhaps can be more formalized as the data people, we will allow you to choose from Postgres,
2,
which we will support. And if we find that you're deploying Mongo, we will find you, or whatever, right?
So I think choice is actually a good thing, but as you said, it's a sharp knife. You got to understand what you're doing there. And I think what, for example, Netflix did back in the days was they paved an easy path. They wanted to people nudge towards, right? So they had libraries all written in Java. They didn't tell you you're not allowed to use anything else than Java, but be aware that we have these 10 nice things if you happen to choose Java. If you don't choose it, you have to do all that stuff yourself.
Right. It made it a lot easier to go down the path they wanted to go down.
Exactly. And at the same time, for those people who really say, well, for these 10 reasons, I cannot use Java, I have to use something else, or it makes more sense to use something else, they said, well, fine. So be it.
And this choice thing isn't new, right?
Yeah.
The moment OpenStack, the first year, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when OpenStack started proliferating, people started playing with that, and they say, hey, we gave out OpenStack to our staff. All of a sudden, the staff started installing MySQL for themselves. Then came Docker, right? Hey, we gave Docker to everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone started running MySQL for themselves. Hey, we got Kubernetes. Everyone started deploying MySQL for themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know. I will put my file down, flag in the ground as I guess, anti-choice. I'm a right-wing conservative about choice. Yeah. Nothing else. Socially liberal, conservative when it comes to own and operating data.
Yeah, that's
well,
right.
I could ask a lot of questions about sharp knives versus dull knives, but I'm not going to go there. But
it's like graders. Like you get the grader. You have choice. No one needs all that choice. There's only one side of a grader. You know what side? You're right.
The sharp side.
It's the big holes. That's the only hard. The big holes. No one knows what all the little other bits are for.
For grating cheese.
But, okay, you might want to rind a lemon or something, but you live your own life. But other than that, And those 3 big holes, well, for slicing cheese, no one uses a, use a knife. You live a little. You like to get halfway through the cheese and go, I'm feeling pretty good about this, and then the cheese takes over and the knife goes wherever. That's living with cheese. I don't, want to go to a grater for my cheese cutting needs.
That was a greater analogy than I could have ever thought of, but no pun intended.
Greater knowledge, yeah.
Boom!
Nice.
You win.
So in terms of, I want to change. I'm not gonna shift the conversation, but a lot of this comes down to choice. You talk about kind of like the backups, right? If you okay, we have a backup on a database, but I don't know how to restore it, right?
All right.
There's so much complexity.
Monitoring. Are you about to run out of data?
Yeah.
The complexity has to go somewhere,
Nice.
right? I mean, like Agent Cockcroft, I'll never forget him talking about this. Like, here's a balloon. Let's squeeze that balloon. Oh, well, look at it. Look what's happened. Like, there's all this kind of, now there's all the kind of the air in the other part of the balloon, and like all the complexity, for example.
So he's a believer in a zero-sum game of complexity. The complexity has to go somewhere.
I haven't asked him that, but I would.
Sense, right?
That's right.
Zero sum. So, but when
it's
it comes,
fair. I mean, that's our profession, right? It's how high up the stack can we do useful things. The complexity's still down there, but none of us have had a conversation in the last half an hour where we've said, but what about the Linux kernel?
what about what?
The Linux kernel.
Yeah, what about
There's
it?
always going to exactly right. There's always going to be something that, and I guess that's where whether it's at the BOSH level or the Kubernetes level or the Cloud Foundry level, you're hoping to God that all that complexity makes your life above wonderful, and you never have to peel the knobs and peel the dials.
Right.
That's why I love the CF, the create service, whether it's the Kubernetes broker or whatever. It's like, I don't care how Postgres works. I don't want to how it maintains. I just want to start sending data to it and reading data back. And so I think Heroku, hopefully in time, is history gets retold. A lot of the abstractions and concepts they came up with, many of which got coded in Cloud Foundry, and hopefully much of that goes back into Kubernetes, becomes...
Well, it's coming back, too. At Spring 1, they were talking about, they're bringing back the term build packs.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it never went away.
It never went away, but it's...
Historically, the Cloud Foundry build packs forked away from Heroku's for reasons mostly about offline. We wanted to be able to have build packs that could have everything in them that we could take into data centers and not have to go off to S3. So I just thought it was great. Terrence and Stephen, Terrence from Heroku and Stephen Levine from Pivotal at Cloud Foundry, actually engineering efforts going in the same direction, and not for Heroku's benefit and Cloud Foundry's benefit, for the benefit of this far larger universe of people who don't know how to stop using Docker files. And the layered approach of responsibility. So the premise is, if you use a Docker file, every piece of responsibility for your app is now yours from the start, where it says from Ubuntu 1804. Congratulations, you're now responsible for everything in that base image. And then you pick a version of Ruby, or pick a version of Java, and then at the end is your app and all of its dependencies. That's probably more responsibility than you, the app developer, really think that you're responsible for.
Well, then they're serverless, and you can just kind of you can abstract all that.
It doesn't change anything. It's still code running in a container. It's someone's responsibility,
the dependencies
right?
still
You
are.
can't, and it's a non-trivial thing to just separate. Hopefully, through the idea in a platform environment, whether it's BOSH with stem cells or Cloud Foundry, Heroku, Kubernetes with base images, right, is that someone else can take responsibility for there being a new base image, ripping them all out and putting the base image. Heroku, they call the slug in Heroku is the bit that's the app owner's sort of responsibility, but the base image is Heroku's. Cloud Foundry, they're called stacks, and so hopefully this idea of build packs, which builds the slug, droplet layer, whatever, we can bring to Kubernetes and start to have that separation of responsibility.
Yeah, it's a thing in Knative now, right? They have a build template for Cloud Foundry build packs.
Right. Knative.
Knative.
There we go.
Buzzword. Blockchain. I win.
Drop the mic. Hey, I do want to just take this time and thank you very much both for talking and having this conversation. I think there are two
Sell your bitcoins.
But thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Dr. Nic Williams, CEO of Stark & Wayne, now living in Have you been in Brisbane the whole time?
No.
No. Okay. You're in
But
Buffalo.
if anyone coming to Brisbane,
you're in Palo Alto.
if you are a tech person and you come to Australia, make sure you come to Brisbane. Literally, if we don't know each other, you just send me a Twitter message. I will come in and hang out with you because not many people visit.
But if you're in Brisbane and like you have a nice dinner and it's dark out, and then you send someone out to just go for a walk, they might not come back though, right? Because they get
Yeah, always walk with a friend and a fly swatter and bug spray.
And Marco Voelz is a software developer at SAP. Thank you so much. Appreciate both your time today. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. That was fun.